Samut was not accustomed to stealth or to following. After leaving the interlopers to plot their battle with the dragon, Samut, Jeru, and their small band had picked up a few more survivors. The roaming bands of Eternals seemed to be thinning, but only because the living denizens of the city had either died, escaped, or on extremely rare occasion hid well enough to survive. The streets of Noctimoon were strangely quiet, broken by the occasional buzz of locust wings and the shuffles and groans of roaming corpses raised by the curse of wandering. Ahead of Samut, a young vizier of Hazaret led the way, introducing himself as Hak. H-A-Q, the vizier had told Samut and Jeru of the battle he had witnessed between Bantu and Hazaret, of Bantu's betrayal and the god Pharaoh's ultimate cruelty. The vizier couldn't have been older than 14, no more than a year or two into his tenure, yet he spoke with a calmness and eloquence that belied his years. After Bantu fell, the scarab god woke the Eternals and attacked the city, Hak said. I had enough time from my vantage at Hazaret's temple to flee, but in ensuing bedlam, I lost track of Hazaret. As a vizier of Hazaret, though, his heart beat as one with his god, and he could sense her presence faintly. He was tracking her movements, trying to reach her, when a roaming band of mummies trapped him in a storehouse. He had hidden within barrels of salted fish until Samut's band happened by. Now the boy led the group with Samut right behind him. Samut prayed quietly that they would reach Hazaret in time, then stopped. It seemed strange to pray to the deity you were trying to save. Hak led the survivors down a path at the foot of a massive monument, turned a corner, then froze. As the rest of the group rounded a corner, everyone gasped. Ronus's body lay inert on the ground. Some of the survivors fell to their knees. Others approached slowly, hands outstretched, desperate to disprove the reality before them. But trembling fingers met solid golden scales and divine robes. The finality of his death washed over the survivors. Tears, angry, cries, and quiet embraces followed. Drew approached the god, kneeling and placing a hand on the god's face. Anger again bubbled in Samut's gut, and she approached the fallen body of Ronus. She climbed up his chest, drawing gasps from some of the others, and stood. Brothers, sisters, we mourn, but we will endure. If you believe the god Pharaoh tests you, you will charge with me to prove yourself. If you believe he betrayed us all, join with me to fight for tomorrow. We will embody the strength Ronus taught us and gifted us through his teachings and his trial. The survivors around her cried out in solidarity, faces hardening from grief to anger. Suddenly Jiro stood, his eyes glued to the horizon. Samut, I think we should seek out shelter, he said. Samut squinted where he looked. From the direction of the gate of the afterlife, a massive sandstorm was sweeping in. In the past, such a storm would have crashed into the Hekma, harmlessly passing against the barrier. But with the Hekma gone, the swirling sands and howling winds approached with alarming speed. A solid wall of dust and darkness. Samut called out to the survivors and turned to retreat the way they had come, but Hak suddenly grasped Samut's hand, pointing in front of him, straight into the storm. Sister, Hazaret comes. She is not alone. Samut looked at the boy, then drew her kopeshes. Warriors, brace yourselves. Stand ready. The survivors drew their weapons and pulled cloths over mouths and faces. Several ducked behind the monument wall for some shelter. Samut, Jeru, and Hak stood where they were, leaning in as the storm swept over them. The stinging sands nipped at them through their closed armor. The three held their arms over their eyes, feet bracing against the buffeting winds. Everything dimmed to a semi-darkness, the sand thick enough to filter out most of the twin sun's light, the roar of the wind blocking out any other sounds. Then Samut saw it, a large shadow approaching in the gloom. The silhouette grew, sharpening into a clearer shape, and soon came the sound of massive feet running. And then Hazaret emerged from the clouds of sand, and Samut again felt her heart surge at the sight of the god. Her excitement immediately dampened as she took in what she saw. Hazaret did not look well. She gripped her spear in one hand, while the other dangled oddly by her side. Gashes and wounds decorated her golden body, and the god's breath came labored and frequent. Hazaret, we've come for you! Hak cried out above the storm. Samut watched Hazaret turn and gazed toward them, face flickering from determination to surprise. Run! The command echoed in Samut's head with the force of an order, and Samut staggered back several steps before seizing control of herself. Hazaret's attention had already turned back behind her, and with a jolt, Samut realized that the towering gloom she had thought was just the rest of the storm was actually a much larger shadow. A scorpion's tail pierced through the haze, and Hazaret parried the strike, dodging to the side as a massive form of the scorpion god crashed into sight. She's slow, Samut nodded, sluggish, and fighting one-handed. Even so injured, Hazaret moved with power and purpose. The scorpion god turned to grasp at her, but Hazaret disappeared in a burst of flame and sand. The scorpion god's mandibles clattered, and Samut watched it swerve and lurch back into the gloom, following Hazaret by some unknown sense. She's casting a spell, Hack said. Samut looked at the ground where Hack pointed and saw a small ring of fire flickering, buffeted in the wind. In the darkness through the sand, Samut saw other little glowing points of light emerge as the sounds of titanic blows continued. "Warriors, fall back!" Jiro cried, backing away from the fiery circle. Samut and Hack followed suit, and the survivors ran for cover behind the monument they passed earlier. The air crackled with energy. An enormous pillar of flame erupted into the storm. Hungry tongues of fire, fed by the winds, licking through the sand. The air itself seemed to burn as the spiraling flames created a massive, undulating column of fire, as tall as any Naktamun's grandest monuments. The heat of the blaze blistered the exposed skin of the survivors and seemed to burn away the sandstorm, the twisty, fiery spell consuming all in its radius. Samut held up a hand against the heat, peering toward the flame. Silhouetted against the red-orange glow with Hazaret, she held her spear in one good hand, pointing at the burning pyre, her arm shaking with concentration. Moments crawled by, and Hazaret finally dropped her arm. The flame pillar persisted as the god fell to her knees, leaning against her spear to stay upright. She caught it in the flame trap, Hack whispered. And indeed, as the fire slowly burned out, Samut could make out the scorpion god's form, standing at the center of the blaze, its carapace glowing white-hot. "It cannot be still alive," Jiro whispered. But the scorpion god took a halting step forward, arm outstretched toward Hazaret, then another step, and its carapace cooled from white to orange, then slowly to charred black. Still it approached, regaining momentum and purpose with each step. Hazaret looked up and moved to stand, but stumbled, falling back to her knees, and the scorpion god ran forward. The flash of a tail, the sickening sound of stinger-piercing flesh. Samut stared, stunned. Hazaret whipped her body around, blocking the scorpion god's blow with her deadened arm. The scorpion god pulled his stinger back, and Hazaret cried out in pain. She rolled backward away from the scorpion god's second strike. Samut watched with horror as green ichor glowed and crawled up Hazaret's limb, creeping its way toward the god's body and heart. Hazaret's spear glowed with heat, a swing of its bladed edge, the sizzle of flesh. A small mist of blood evaporated in the air as molten edge cauterized the cut. Hazaret crouched, panting hard, blood seeping from the wound that had saved her life. Before her, her severed arm blackened, the poison consuming the flesh. And again the scorpion god approached. Samut let out a primal scream and sprinted forward, terror and rage and pain and heartbreak melting into molten strength. Behind her, she was faintly aware of Hack and other mages raiding spells. In front of her, the impossible height of the scorpion god loomed. She was tiny. She was inconsequential, and she did not care. Instinct seized Samut as she channeled magical power to her leg. She leaped into the air, launching herself, flying over Hazaret and toward the dark god. Kopesh's grew with blades pointing downward. She smashed into the scorpion god's side, and her blades pierced its carapace, lodging there and giving her a temporary handhold. Surprise turned to epiphany, and she realized that the molten heat from Hazaret's spell must have softened the god's impenetrable shell. Samut laughed, a blend of battle rage and utter joy. She gave her blades a shake and a jolt, sliding down the god's body, gravity lending momentum to her descent. She swung her feet out and carved across the god's ribs towards his abdomen, her blades slicing through the heated carapace like an ibis cutting through a clear blue sky. The scorpion god roared and swatted at her, an insect-like god trying to squat an insect-like human. But Samut pulled her blades loose and launched herself again, kicking off his chest, her kopeshes biting into the god's arm. She cut a thin line through his shell before the god flicked her off with a shake of his hand. A cloud of sand softened Samut's crash landing as she stood, slightly dazed. A Minotaur mage approached, hands aglow with power, now shaping sands into a dense mass, pummeling at the scorpion god's legs. Behind him, other mages launched bolts of fire and blasts of lightning at the god. Samut! Push it toward the river! Jero's cry carried across the distance, and Samut spotted him running with two other warriors towards a cluster of obelisks in the distance. A genuine grin flashed across Samut's face as she realized Jero's plan. To me, she cried, and the remaining survivors from their band charged forward, following her lead. The mortals battled with the weakened god, battering it with blows and spells, and even screeched as it was snatched out of the air, crushed in the god's grip. A warrior wielding twin axes disappeared underfoot, the god's step obliterating him where he stood. A spray of venom from the god's tail caught several mages by surprise, and they collapsed in the acrid pools. But the mortals chipped away at the god, their blows battering its melted carapace, and they succeeded in pushing it back, ever closer to the field of obelisks. The scorpion god raged, lashing out at the combatants, barraging it with spells, arrows, and spears. Behind, Jiro stood at the ready with a few others, partially hidden behind a half-toppled obelisk. So close, Samut thought, surveying the battle, but the scorpion god managed to hold its ground, just a touch too far from Jiro's waiting trap. We need to push it back, just a little further, Samut shouted. From behind her, Samut heard a clear voice ring out. Dark God, Foronas, I will strike you down. She turned, and the sight took Samut's breath away. A lone Kenra stood, hosting Ronus' staff into the air, the weapon magically reforged into one. Her hands aglow with golden power, some last vestige of the god's strength coursing through her body, and she ran forward with the staff held high overhead. Samut and the other survivors dove out of the way as the Kenra passed. With a mighty roar, the Kenra swung the staff at the scorpion god. The god raised his arms to block the blow, but the force of the strike knocked it careening back. Fragments of carapace fell from its arms, shattering into pieces. At that moment, Jero and his team ran forward. A rope held taut between them, tripping the scorpion god as he fell backward toward the obelisks, their pointed edge suddenly a field of daggers for the enormous god. But Samut could see the arc of the god's fall, and the angle of the obelisks would not align. Without a word, she once again dashed forward and leaped, propelled by magical force, smashing into the falling god, tipping to the right, just the right amount, and an earth-shattering crunch echoed across the battlefield as the obelisk pierced the scorpion god's chest. The assembled survivors let out wild cheers, but Samut simply watched the god with grim suspicion. The god twitched and clawed feebly at the obelisk protruding from its chest, but it did not cease moving. Whatever power beckoned it to stalk and kill still pulled at its broken body, still commanded its tail to lash out weakly. Thank you, my children. Hazaret limped toward the scorpion god, leaning on her staff as a cane, the young hack walking beside her. The survivors surged toward Hazaret, but she shook her head. You have all done more than I could have asked, more than any mortal has, but this task I must finish myself. Samut and Jiro and the others stepped back as Hazaret approached the scorpion god, still struggling weakly. Hazaret looked upon the massive beast, tears glistening on her face. You have slain my brothers and sisters, but I know it was not by your wish or design. Rest now, brother. May my fires free you from this form and these dark shackles. With a jab, Hazaret pierced the scorpion god with her two-pronged spear, right where the obelisk protruded from its shell. Rippling heat emanated from her, and black smoke billowed forth from the scorpion god as it burned from the inside out, until its outer carapace collapsed inward, the god reduced to cinders and ash. At last, Hazaret drew back her spear and thrust it into the ground. The god looked about until she spotted Samut, then knelt before the mortal. Samut stood stunned. Hazaret reached out a large hand, and Samut raised her own hands, grasping Hazaret's finger, feeling the warm and healing of the god before her. In the arena, Samut, you told me that you believed that I was not what I was forced to do, that I would protect my children when you all needed me most. Samut looked into the eyes of her god and smiled. You have, Samut, or you have, Hazaret, and I thank you. Hazaret shook her head. I could not have done so without you. You, my beloved children, protected me when I needed you the most. My heart is yours. Thank you, Samut the Tested. You have seen through the trials and bested the darkness beyond. Tears of unbridled joy trickled down Samut's face. Pride, strength, and boundless